Well, we have a chance to get some guys who are making Let's do it.
Very civilized. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Martin McAvoy. I'm founder of Signium in Ireland, and we're actually just kicking into our 23rd year of trading this year, which is kind of nice. So hopefully it'll be as good as the last 22 years. We're very happy to welcome you to the second in the series of the Signium interview, which is a welcome initiative that was suggested by Paul Holland, our partner here, a couple of years ago. I'm going to hand over to Paul in a moment. I'm going to try and stick to our schedule as tightly as possible. Our running order is that Paul will speak with Eddie for about 30-35 minutes. It's going to be fairly informal. I'm going to be particularly interested to hear Eddie's thoughts about leading a business with purpose. So that's kind of the area that I'm particularly interested in, I suppose. And we'll then get some questions from the floor. I think there's one or two people from the industry here, and there's people from very, very broad sectors. In fact, there's over 20 different industry sectors represented here today, which reflects the nature of our clients and the sort of clients we work with worldwide. But enough of the promo. I'm going to chat about Eddie just for a minute. He's been a long-term champion of renewable energy. In fact, I think his first wind farm was developed in Mayo, possibly in 1992, which is 25 years ago, I think. And he's a worldwide renowned entrepreneur in renewable energy. He's a chemical engineer by background and began his career with ESB and subsequently became CEO of Bordemona, where he turned a business which was losing about 20 million at the time into a profitable business. He founded Electricity in '97 and led Ireland's first global renewable energy company to a 1.8 billion acquisition by Aon and Scottish and Southern Energy in 2008. So at that stage, he then established Mainstream Renewables, and the CEO. He's built up a truly global business with a portfolio of projects of about 9,000 megawatts in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia is being developed as we speak. He was recently appointed executive chairman of Mainstream and has achieved global recognition as one of the most innovative and successful renewable energy industry leaders. He's got a whole bunch of accolades which I was going to read through, but I think I have to read the room and let you read it off his website. So without much further ado, oh, by the way, if any of you are given to tweeting, there is a hashtag called hashtags. Oh, I should be saying handle, shouldn't I? Sorry, the handle is hashtag Signium interview. All right, I'll hand over now to Paul. Thank you.
Martin. Good morning, everybody, and Eddie, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I want to start by asking you, it's 20 years this year since you set up Electricity, which was Ireland's first recognised renewable energy company, and what's your view looking back now over those 20 years? Is the industry where you thought it would be, or what are your thoughts now?
Well, the industry itself is accelerating at a great rate. There was 161,000 megawatts of renewable energy installed in the United States last year. Not going to be an awful lot different this year. It doesn't matter what Trump says or does. We're now about half the price of coal. We're probably 2/3 of the price of gas. We're about 1/10 the price of nuclear. So I don't see any reason why anybody should install coal, oil or gas in the future. So, you know, what we aim to do when we set up Mainstream was to just, you know, recognise that every country has to make this transition. And if we could build the competencies, get the staff together, get the finance organised, and pick a certain number of countries where it's going to work. But just to tell you the difference between turbines between now and when we built Bellacorig in 1992, the size of the turbine was 1/4 of a megawatt. Right now, the standard size of a turbine is 4 megawatts. Doesn't matter what the megawatt is, but it's 16 times as large. And if you go offshore, it's about 10 megawatts. And GE are building a 12.5 megawatt one in Vietnam. And I read 2 weeks ago that some Americans are developing a 50 megawatt turbine. So we've now moved into the realm of just power stations. We're building wind turbines, which are power stations. And solar has collapsed in price by about 85% since 2009. So that gives this industry massive momentum.
And you were quoted recently as saying that renewable energy has reached its iPhone moment. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's just taken off. I mean, remember Nokia had I think a 60% world market share, and then Steve Jobs came along with the iPhone, and then I think Nokia got bought there 2 years ago by Microsoft for pittance. So we're there now, and I'm very happy to say that the mainstream is number one now. I don't want to sound like this is not triumphalist. This has been the hardest 10 years that I've ever done, trying to get mainstream going, because we came through a period which was just north of the Great Depression in the 30s, and there was times in mainstream when we were delayed payments from South Africa, and I had to actually dip into my private account and pay money. I would have lost the company. We came that close about 3 years ago to losing the company. But I was quite happy to do that because, well, I had it. But if we had to go to the venture people at that stage, we'd have completely lost it.
And of course, you started mainstream in 2008. I mean, you couldn't have picked for a capital-intensive industry, picked a tougher time to do it.
No, that's true. We visited America in 2009 looking for money, and Whistle Dixie, there was no money to be had anywhere. We weren't just alone. I mean, nobody could get money. But the blow that doesn't kill you strengthens you. I thought I'd done business in Portmore, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But and I thought I'd done business in electricity, but really, until you've been staring extinction in the face, and you wake up in the middle of the night and you say, well, at least I kept some money back from putting it all into mainstream, and then you go back to sleep.
Was that the classic entrepreneur? You keep rolling the dice.
Well, my father was always a big one against gambling, and I never saw myself as a gambler. I saw it just logic. From the time that I had a board member in Portmore who said, Eddie, this CO2 thing is very bad. I said, what do you mean? We release more CO2 than anybody else in Ireland. What do you mean it's very bad? Well, it's causing global warming. I said, that couldn't be. The whole electricity industry is founded on putting up billions of tons of CO2. He said, well, you should read a bit about it. And I did, and that's where I came across the Tyndall effect. There was a guy called John Tyndall from Carlow who discovered in 1861 that when you pass radiation through a series of gases, it passes through oxygen and nitrogen, which are 98% of the atmosphere, without being absorbed. But CO2, it absorbs it, and so does methane, and so does water vapor. But we have increased the CO2 content now by 50% above pre-industrial times. So it's a fact. And we're absorbing the equivalent of 4 Hiroshima atomic bombs in energy terms in the atmosphere every second. This is very hard to appreciate just what energy we're putting up there until you see something like 50 inches of rain falling simultaneously in Baja, California, and in Houston, and then Irma comes along, and then you begin to understand why this is all there. Because this massive amount of energy is lifting up this quantity of water and depositing it. And that's costing the world, or America, let's say, what, 100 billion?
Yeah.
$100 billion.
Every couple of years.
And somebody has to pay for that. So that's why we have the Paris Accord. But we saw that coming, and I thought, well, this is science. And, I don't believe in creationism. I believe, trained as a chemical engineer, and chemistry matters, and physics matters, and mathematics will tell you things if you know how to use it. And so it was a fact. And then the wind industry came along, and the Danes were fantastic. They built the Gedser machine, which is a 3-bladed upwind machine, and it worked right from the start. We haven't really changed that design all that much in the meantime.
And has the biggest challenge in mainstream been access to capital?
Yeah, that's challenging. But working with different cultures is the real interesting bit as far as I'm concerned. When how do you cope with a different culture? Human beings are all the same, but they're vastly different in culture. The assumptions that an American makes, the assumptions that a Chilean makes, the assumptions that a South African makes, and the assumptions an Irishman makes are completely different. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. So it's very hard to know how do you talk to people like this? How do you actually build plant on their land? And so, you know, we use anthropologists in Chile, for instance, to help us with the Mapuche people down there. And I read a lot of history when we go into a new country. I always like to read the history and see what happened. But you know, you have to kind of live there, and if you don't speak the language, which I don't, unfortunately, you miss a huge amount of the culture. So that's probably the most difficult thing, is coping with these cultures. And it reaches its quintessence in Africa, where they're probably 1,400 years ago. The only analogy, it's a tribal society that the conquistadors, the colonialists, drew lines on maps and called them countries, but they're not countries. Kenya has 56 different languages, and Ethiopia has 82 different languages. These are a whole bunch of tribes. Anyway, trying to cope with that is impossible, actually.
Yeah.
Nobody.
And do you bring management with you? Do you hire local teams in local markets? How do you get over the cultural issues?
You have to get local people involved. All development is local. It's like politics. Politics is all local. Development is all local. You're actually putting things on people's
And is
land.
finance local as well, or can you get?
No, finance is global. Finance is always global. And if the proposition is right, you know, the money will follow.
And you set up mainstream renewable capital as well too.
Yeah. We, you know, 50, 60, 70% of our business is just finding the money. If you think that each megawatt that exists costs $1 million euros or dollars to build, and for instance, we've won in the last 4 years, we've won 2,300 megawatts competitively against all comers in places like, well, Illinois in America, Chile, South Africa, Ghana, and then Vietnam as well. So when you win these things, that 2.3 gigawatts is 2.3 billion you have to find. Now, a lot of that is senior debt. It's 75% senior debt, but then there's a whole big tranche of equity you have to find as well. And it's that equity that's the challenging bit. I mean, the banks understand renewable energy, and banks are usually quite happy to invest.
So let me bring you back. If the last 10 years was a big challenge, the previous 10 years was electricity, and you built from the standing start a €2 billion company or dollar company. So that was a lot easier, was it?
Well, it was, yeah. But I mean, you get lucky.
What were the milestones in terms of putting that together?
Well, it set us up in the beginning. John Lavery's his pal of mine, and he'd, we very stupidly, I suppose, or very silly, tried to privatise Bordemona and would have bought it. But Michael McDowell, in his wisdom, didn't think that was appropriate. And so then I left Bordemona, and John Lavery, I met John Lavery one Friday, and he said to me, "What are you going to do now, Andy?" And I said, "I think I'll do the wind." He said, "How much do you need?" I said, "I didn't expect the question. I suppose $500,000 do." So he rang me then 5 days later, and he said, "I have it now, Andy." And so we had 470,000 to start with. And then we lost out in our first big bid. I put a little team together of Brian Hurley and Louis Sherrill and Paul Dowling, and then we lost out. They had a competitive thing going here in Ireland at the time, and Treasury won everything. They won 100 out of 90, and we won nothing. And then they didn't build anything. There was no penalties on that, so fair dues to them. Anyway, we had to get into this business. We got lucky because Europe had a directive which was opening up the electricity system, and the plan was to let the top 240 people, customers like Intel and big huge consumers, to let them have choice. But we managed to work with the Dáil. It's very funny actually. I went to Mary O'Rourke, who was the minister at the time. I rang her up and said, "I need to talk to you about this act." "You talked to me? I had the ESB on to me this morning, and I had the unions on after that, and now you're on to me, and I'm pissed off." Right, well, what do you think I should do? Do what everybody else does. Go into the Dáil and talk to your deputies. So we did that. And we got 5 clauses inserted into the Act, the Electricity Regulation Act of 1999. And that allowed us to set up a supply business. And that was great. I mean, that was the stuff I loved doing, because we were changing the rules completely. Nobody copied us, because they couldn't. It was complicated, it was difficult. I remember talking to Johnny Ronan later on, he says, Eddie, have a look at them rules. I couldn't understand them. Well, I didn't really be truthful. I didn't tell Johnny, I couldn't understand them either. I had some people who could. And so we began to sell to the small and medium-sized businesses. And it's amazing how a little bit of market research takes you a long way, because we did these focus groups, and we brought in the domestic customer, which is like householders, and we said to the householders, what do you think of the electricity business? Oh, it's great, the ESB are wonderful, they always look after us, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get much, well, I'm going to be able to do it with them. Brought in the small business, and there's 300,000 small businesses in Ireland. They're the backbone of every economy. And we asked them, oh, that ESB, they're shock and shower. They charge us too much, they don't listen to us, they don't give us good service. So I said, bingo. And we just did 2 or 3 focus groups, and then that was our niche. So we began to sell wind power right from the word go. From the year 2000 onwards, we began to sell at a discount of 10% to the ESB. So that was at the heart of business, is innovation. If you don't innovate, you die in business. And you know, we've had hundreds of copiers ever since that, but that's always been the way.
And so roll on to 27, to 207, 208, and the business was bought by SSE.
Yeah.
And at the time, was it you didn't really want to sell? You wanted
Well, I wanted to buy it myself.
Okay.
That kind of a guy. But I came too late to raise the money. Oh no, it wasn't that I didn't want to sell. I mean, of course, you know, the shareholders, you know, and Tom Roach was a terrific investor. I mean, I'd have to pay a great tribute. That's how I got lucky, because Tom had run this, you know, he was running the toll roads, and he was given a lot of cash, and his investor said he should be doing something with that other than giving it back to us, the dividend, which we pay a huge tax on. So he invested with us 3.3 million in equity and 6 million in debt instrument, and we took it from there, and that worked
That
great.
was a game changer.
That was it. That was like deciding to go after the customer, the small and SME customer, and yeah, that was a big game changer. And then, you know, we were like the experience I got from Board Mona, which was really fantastic. You were playing in a pool where there was a lot of enthusiasts without any big management experience. Nobody with any management experience would go near renewable energy, which is great, because that left the field nice and well, we were elevated, let's say, in our minds anyway.
And so you built the business in Ireland, very Irish-centric business. And now, if you look at Mainstream, there's about 9,000 megawatts in operation or in development, but it's in Chile, in South Africa, in Vietnam. There's not a lot in Ireland now.
No, we came when you sell a business like that, all your assets are gone, and you're starting off with a clean sheet. And I wasn't quite starting off with a clean sheet, because there was about 30 or 35 people who worked in electricity who came across to Mainstream. And you know, just part of my philosophy on life, and I see Elaine is here, but you know, our business is about people. It's just about people. If you've got the right people, then you'll always win. And one of the first functions we set up was our HR function, and that was the same actually in electricity as well. And I believe in that. And then you have to motivate these people to select the right ones, and then motivate them, and then you know, keep them interested, give them tough targets, but all the time do performance reviews, and you know, keep everybody going forward. So we did get those 35 people came across from electricity, but we had nothing in Ireland, and Ireland was picked over by everybody at this stage. I mean, the success of electricity and various others just flooded the place with and every field that had a bit of wind on it was nearly claimed at that stage. So, and Bord Mona and the ESB and Bord Gosh were out paying silly money.
So it was easier to develop international assets than...
Well, I knew the transition had to happen globally. This wasn't going to just be an Irish or an American or an English or German or Spanish or Danish phenomenon. They're the places where it was happening. You know, 190 nations in the world are going to have to make this transition. So we said, let's be the first here to do this. This is more innovation. Let's bring it to other places. And we know a lot. You know, we've built up a lot of information about policy and policy formulation. We work very closely with government. I mean, the government of the Philippines now, for instance, is at the moment saying they want to install 10,000 megawatts 8,000 megawatts of coal. And I did a little sum there based on the latest prices of coal versus wind and solar. And I reckon that their people would save $1.03 billion if they installed wind instead of coal over the next 10 years. And if they charge for carbon, they'd save $2 billion. So that's a fact. If you want to go out commercially now, try and buy coal or gas or well, nuclear is ridiculously expensive. But renewables are just so much cheaper now. And we've built a global brand, and you know, everywhere we go, we meet the government and we're able to present them with facts and figures, and they say, but where does this happen? Well, it's happened in Chile. You know, 4 years ago we bid $1.10, you know, 3 years ago we bid 0.79, and last year we bid 0.41, and that's the way the price has been coming down. And in Chile we had to compete against coal, oil and gas, and we won. There was no coal things awarded. Even old coal, even guys who had power stations that were 20 years old, and we were bidding against the marginal cost of buying coal and paying people to run the station. We competed against that and won. So this world about, think of it, think of the future. By 2050, every car will be electric. The coal industry will be completely dead. The oil industry will be supplying nanofibers and plastics and all that kind of stuff, and it will continue indefinitely, but it won't be burned. And the gas industry will be closed as well. And so all those great behemoths of modern industry will be gone away. And what will be here is renewable energy companies.
And will your focus continue to be on emerging markets like Chile and Philippines and Vietnam, places like that, or will you look to more mature markets at some stage?
Well, we'd be opportunistic, Paul.
Yeah.
You know, we were the great big market leaders offshore. We built the Arklow banks off the coast of Ireland here with GE in 2004, and then we developed the next biggest one in the Outer Thames estuary in London, and then we developed 2 huge wind farms off the coast of Yorkshire, and then one in Scotland. But now we've exited that business because that's suddenly become a huge big company play with big balance sheets, and the risk taking that we know how to manage is not important anymore in that. So we're going to places where, if you know how to manage risks, well then the returns are quite high. Risk and return, as you know, are just
sure.
two sides of the same coin.
And in terms of Ireland, where are we in terms of honouring our obligations in the Paris Accord? What do you think the main challenges there for us?
Oh, the challenge is the supergrid. I mean, Ireland can't go to 40% of its electricity from renewables. No country can. No island market can, because the business case for renewable energy goes away. If you think of it now, we've got about 3,000 megawatts of wind energy installed here in Ireland, and the demand in August and July is maybe 1,200 megawatts. So, you know, if the wind is blowing anytime there, the grid can't accept 1,800 megawatts. So the business case for renewables goes away above about 25% penetration. So we need the supergrid. Now I thought this, I knew I did some analysis and I knew that we needed this, and I proposed this in 2002, this supergrid, and I set up an institution in Europe to try and build it. And I talked to Tony Blair about it. He said, yes, I think this is an excellent idea, and I'll discuss it with Mrs. Merkel. And he did, but you know, she didn't go for this. She's very much a now person, you know, keep the whole thing rolling along nicely, and if you're Germany, that's great. Well, I wonder, is it great? So great. We'll see what happens to their car industry now that diesel has been debunked and that the world is going to electric cars. But you need a supergrid, and Ireland isn't linked really. It's got 2 interconnectors with England, which are, one of them is very weak, and the other is just takes power in from England really. We don't ship it back out that way. And you need a grid linking up the whole of Europe if you want to go to more than 25%, and we can't do that. So we're going to finish up paying big fines, is the answer to your question.
Right. And one of the things that you've talked about and in terms of researching this article, speaking to people, or this interview and speaking to people, the whole concept of business having a broader social purpose is something that's always been important to you. What's your sense of that? What's driving that? Well,
you know, we live in a connected world. We live in families first of all, then we live in communities, then we live in some parts of the world we live in nation states, or we live in tribes. And we have a sense of purpose that comes from that responsibility of living together. And there's an awful lot of us now. There's 7 billion of us. And by 2050, they're mainly in Africa, but there could be between 10 and 11 billion. And of course you have, and then the environment is changing. All these people, needing energy, and we use a lot of energy, but it's there from the sun. And what we've been doing up to now is we've been taking the store of energy out of the earth. So it seems to me that the essence of business is finding out the kind of things that people need, and then you supply that. You find out what people need and you supply it. That's what the entrepreneur does. And to me, ethics in business makes a huge amount of sense. And we put an awful store in our company on a set of values where, when you set up a company, you're trying to create something that's going to last beyond, if you like, the current set of leaders. So what you try and do is get people to buy into a set of values like respect. We talked about cultures earlier on. Cultures are so different, so you have to respect these cultures. And then, we're entrepreneurial and we're innovative. We do copy sometimes, but we prefer not to copy. We prefer to invent the future as you see it. And that's a value in the company. So you praise and you select people. We talk to our people 8 times every year by video conference thing, and we select a person at the moment all the time, and they've exhibited some of these values. For instance, safety is our top value. We begin all our meetings with safety. And in South Africa, where we'd be recruiting thousands of people to work on a wind farm who never worked before, and recently we passed 1.5 million man-hours with no lost time incidents in one farm in South Africa, and 1 million man-hours in another farm. And that doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
There could be 20 people dead easily there, and 40 years ago there would have been. These things are all manageable, and so is culture manageable. It takes a long time to establish culture. They say 7 years. But if you do that, then you agree about certain things, so there shouldn't be any argument about things. In business, one of the key destroyers of things is, people debating things endlessly and not having any set of basic things they agree on. So we just talk about these values all the time.
And everybody understands them in the organisation.
Well, we try and explain them. I don't know whether everybody understands them all the time. I have a great understanding. Like this pair of eyes looking out, 160 looking in. I don't know, but we talk about it.
And you mentioned luck twice, I think, in the conversation. And Patrick Kennedy from Paddy Power was sitting there a year or 2 ago, and he talked about luck as well, and the importance of getting the breaks. What lucky breaks have you had, do you think?
Well, first of all, I was born in Ireland, right? I had Bob O'Connor as my father, and he believed in education, so was my mother, and that was great. And we were born at this time in the 20th century. I mean, I could go on about an awful lot of things that we assume and we take for granted completely.
Sure.
And leaving all that aside, then you're given a certain set of attributes. You're born with a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of whatever, and then you get the chance here in Ireland to express that. I mean, I was sent to university before there was free education, so that's very lucky. And then there's internal motivating factors. So I think everything is really can be attributed to look at what you're born with, and then you have to kind of go with the flow there. You have to. I mean, I used to be really envious and jealous of people who like the world as it is now. I used to think, those happy people, they're not like me. I have to change everything, and it took me a good while to realise that's all right.
Right.
This is good. Once you learn to cope with that stuff, you can do it. So it's just that. Then you get the breaks. I mean, I was in the ESB, and Brendan Hannigan was chairman of Board Mona, and he advertises for it, and I apply for it, and I get it. And poor old Board Mona, 4,200 people, 200 million in debt, 100 million sales, loss of 20 million, and it took me 2 years to find out what the losses really were. and you know, 3 years later, then we had 1,800 people, and we laid the basis for all the new power stations that were built there, and we set up the environmental products division, and we tried to create cultures there, and the culture there was focusing on the customer. Like a lot of these old utilities saw the customers as your enemy, number one enemy. Very hard. I mean,
It's not a good model.
it's not a good model. It doesn't really work commercially. So that Board Demona thing was really tough at the time, you know, because you know, when you're working for and with politicians and with civil servants, they're not necessarily the easiest people to work because they keep on changing. Policy keeps on changing, and they're not commercially driven. So the idea of making a profit or of enhancing cash flows, you know, how many people are you employing might be a key.
And was that one of the reasons that you wanted to do something totally different and entrepreneurial after Board Demona?
Well, we set up the employee enterprise scheme at Board Demona, which, you know, we used to pay staff by the hour, and of course when the sun shone and you were making peat, they did very little work because they wanted the overtime that evening. So we managed to let 2,400 guys go without a strike, and then we instituted the employee enterprise scheme. So that was very enterprising. We gave them a new set of equipment. We paid them per quality ton of product, and they assured me there'd never be a crisis of production anymore because now they were motivated in the right way. So you always had this idea. I remember having an argument with my father when he was retired. Why didn't he sell all this expertise he has, you know? So there seemed to be something in there which said, you know, you got to go out and do it. He didn't, but then that was it. And that's, you know, there's a lot of luck in this stuff. We couldn't have changed Board Demona except Alan Jukes in 1988 had announced the TALIS strategy, and he was going to support the government in getting the public sector organised. And you know, I was able to let go, had to let go 2,400 people. The productivity had.
What was that like, letting go that amount of people? That must.
Well, yeah, I remember, you know, the way I do change management is you listen very carefully to the people in the company. The people who know most about any company are the workers in that company. And I went around and I had 24 meetings when I brought in all the workers at Board Demona. I just sat down and listened to them for a day. And I took notes all this time. This happened to be the first time they'd ever seen a managing director. The managing director used to live in Dublin, and everything happened out of the country. So and then I talked to the unions, and I said, listen, lads, you can have your policies, or you can have a company. Now you got to choose, and in fact they choose to go with the employee enterprise scheme, with a slight variation, but this really worked, and the unions embraced it. And this is a huge amount in leadership about authenticity, about being with the people and not being afraid to listen to their hurt and to listen to their diagnosis of what's wrong, and there was a lot wrong, but they told me all about it. And so that was a big learning thing, and when you're ever moving and working in business, you know, what you try and do is find the natural leaders and try and influence those, because there'll always be natural leaders. They mightn't be the shop steward. The shop steward is often the guy who's put up to the front by the natural leader and is the mouthpiece, whereas the thinking is done behind here. So I wanted to get to the guys who were doing the thinking, and they all agreed, yeah, this guy has a plan, and we'll go along with that.
And so it's looking to the future then. It's an interesting juncture in your life. You've stepped down from the CEO role in mainstream, and you're taking on the executive chairman role. What's the plan for the next 5 years now? What are you going to focus on?
Well, there's a huge job to be done in the company, and Andy, who's the new chief executive, who's a fantastic manager altogether, and we've agreed what we're going to do and how we're going to divide up the work. I'm going to be trying to find partnerships globally. I'll be doing a lot of travel, and you know, the funding I'll be helping out with on the funding side. But you know, I've zero interest in non-executive directorships or anything like that. Oh, very bad non-executive director. Very, very bad. I need to do.
You need to get under the bonnet.
Oh yeah. No, I'd be hopeless. But I'd love to electrify Africa. yeah, I mean, this is the greatest intellectual, cultural, commercial, massively big challenge in the world. And I want to set up an institute now, which will electrify Africa. Because I found a correlation between the degree of electrification and the wealth of a country. I just did, and I plotted it on the graph. And it's not for knock, it's one for one. The more electrification you have, the more. And what's really interesting about Ireland, the first act that the new government in 1921 wrote was the Electricity Supply Act of 1927, and they built Ireland Prussia. But over that, from then to the mid-50s, they electrified the whole of the country. Really interestingly, what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did when he ran on a platform in America in 1932 to do rural electrification. And he introduced executive orders before he had a majority in the Senate and the House. And then when he got a majority in the Senate and the House in 36, he introduced the Rural Electrification Act. And that brought electricity to every town and village and hamlet in America. And then America grew from 40 to 70 at 8.6% a year, and that created America. So electricity actually built. It is the key, is the clue. If you can do that, if you can find a way to do that, but there's going to be a lot of work for anthropologists here. There's going to be a lot of work for financiers.
And what does your wife feel about this stage of your life, a small job of electrifying Africa?
Well, I talk to her a lot about it. I'm an extrovert, and so I talk to her. I know most chief executives are not extroverts. Most chief executives are introverts because it's. And just in case you don't know what an extrovert is somebody who takes their strength from others. An introvert is somebody who takes their strength from within. 25% of people are introverts, 75% are extroverts, right? That's a bit of psychology for you.
Right, okay.
But so I'm one of those. So I talk to her about it. Oh, she's got used to the fact that she doesn't see me too often, and that I do knock off at weekends.
Yeah.
I sleep every lunchtime. I have done since I was 27.
Sleep every lunchtime?
Yeah, all the time.
For how long?
Half an hour. You got to do that. Well, you see, so much of this stuff is about energy. You have to, if you're in a leadership position, you have to be able to listen to people. And if you're tired, you can't listen to people. And I remember when I was in UCD studying, and the lecture from 2 to 3 was horrible for me. Did you ever try to write when you're going to sleep? So there had to be some solution to that. So that's my solution, and it kind of works.
Well, one final question, and we definitely have to have you back when you've electrified Africa, because I've no doubt you'll do it. What advice would you give, looking back now, to a 30-year-old Eddie O'Connor looking to set up a global enterprise out of Ireland?
Well, first of all, recognise it's all right to be afraid, right? Everybody's afraid. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Follow your dream, because enthusiasmos is I think the Greek for next to God, and enthusiasm gets you huge places. Because people follow those who are enthusiastic. So, and you're far more likely to be enthusiastic if you're actually doing something that you like. Now, some of that might be just drawing pretty girls, might be drawing beautiful seamen, might be writing poetry, I don't know. But do it anyway, because that's that's the gift you were given. So follow your gifts, I would say to people, no matter where they take you. And that's all I would say really, because nobody's first of all, nobody's ever going to listen to advice, Paul, right? People always do what's right for themselves, and I say, well, be sure you do, and treat others like you want to be treated. There's a lot in the old Confucius thing. Studied a lot of the way China does things. We could talk a lot. I've delivered 5 speeches on China, and I'm fascinated by a no-God culture and where we live in the now, and realize that this is not a dry run. This is not a practice session.
Yeah.
You get one shot at it, and you'd hate to look back when you're 70 and say, oh, So follow your dream and do it with enthusiasm, and people will, you'll then, whatever it is, you might not make huge quantities of money, but what's money if you're not?
Listen, Eddie, thanks a million. It's been fantastic listening to you, and appreciate your time.
Thanks again, Eddie. We might just encourage people from the floor to ask a couple of questions. We've got about 10 minutes we can play with, I think. So we've got Ger and Ronnie with microphones on either of the wings. So if you maybe want to put a hand up, and if you get a microphone, you might just state your name and your organisation as well, where Eddie will understand what the agenda of the question is. That would be great.
Good morning, Michael Brennan from Sherry Fitzgerald. Eddie, it's a fantastic story and huge congratulations. You talk a lot about people and a lot about culture and values, and obviously your organisations have huge numbers of people. The question I have is, you earlier in the interview you mentioned that you got to keep people motivated. You have to give them tough targets. Could you just talk about that a little bit? I mean, how tough is a target, and is it more buying into the dream, or is it share options to motivate them?
Oh, well, here's something that you gotta know. Share options motivate nobody. They're too long term. If you want to motivate people, there has to be a direct correlation. I mean, you will not stop anybody speeding if you send them a speeding ticket 2 years later. If you want to stop people speeding, you hit them now, and they pay the money now, and then they stop speeding. So there has to be a much more direct cause and effect thing here in terms of motivation. The targets are, you sit down with people. I let people draft their own targets, and then I will review them with them. Sometimes you make changes, but generally speaking, this is what you've committed to. And it's always better when, instead of you writing stuff and saying, here's what you'll do, they know their roles, they're hopefully put in the right position, and so they write their targets themselves, and you just, we've 5 or 6 targets that they have, and then we review them then at the half yearly stage, and then at the full year, and we pay according to the achievement of those targets. But pay itself, once people, I'm a huge believer in the motivation hygiene theory. Money above a certain payment is just, it doesn't motivate anymore. Money motivates hugely if you have to buy a house, and you have to feed your family, and you have to send your kids to school and all that stuff. But above a certain level, it's job satisfaction that really matters. It's, does the boss actually appreciate what I'm doing? Because the boss has that effect on people. And if you ever want to get rid of somebody out of a company, just remove the love. It's that simple. They'll leave. Just don't appreciate them. If you want to hold on to them, you appreciate them deeply every day, and you find different ways to do that. Because nobody likes to think that, oh, he's just saying this, he said the same thing yesterday, and I saw him saying the same thing to somebody else. You have to be subtle about this thing. It's much better if you mean it. But sometimes maybe you can mean it, because maybe the wife just gives you a hard time, or something happens with the kids or something like that. So, but you're the leader, and you've got to lead, and that means absorbing a huge amount of if you like, your own difficulties, and you can't share them with people who report to you. So really just appreciate what people do profoundly, and you'll get the best out of them. And they'll go huge miles.
Great, thank you very much.
All right. Anybody else with anything?
I've got a cold, so I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Michelle Noon from the Public Appointment Service. Eddie, thank you very much. Really, really interesting discussion. Really get a sense of your whole sense of purpose throughout your career. I'm delighted to hear you talking about anthropologists, because I studied anthropology, so very interested in the cultural aspect. Also got a huge sense in terms of the values, but as well as that, the risks and the ups and downs throughout your career. And I'm just wondering about resilience. How have you developed resilience over the years? Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's probably a lot of old genetic stuff in there about resilience. And it does, I suppose, it's good to have, be in a good marriage, and it's good to have children. But I suppose if your sense of purpose is, if you're on purpose, then you resilience comes to you. That you want to do something, and it doesn't matter, what knocks you get. That if your purpose is high enough, and you can test purpose actually. Sean Brophy is a great psychologist here in town. He's getting on a bit at this stage, but I brought him into Boardmona, and he tested all of us for purpose. Were we on purpose or off purpose? So if you really believe something, it comes back to this authenticity of belief. What's your belief system? And I know the world is strangling itself now with this energy in the atmosphere that comes from too much carbon dioxide. And I know we have a solution to that. So there's nothing going to stop me trying to do that. So now I think a lot of other people will have all kinds of different ways of being resilient, but it is an important factor. And I suppose the opposite to maybe depression, where and I'm lucky enough I don't suffer from that. And I really feel for people who might, because it's a terrible drawback. But what can I say? It's just like you have good friends too. I mean, when I came out of Portmona and the circumstances I came out of Portmona were not ideal. I've done an incredible job there, and then governments change and people accuse you of being corrupt and stuff like that, which was, well, I knew I wasn't corrupt, so that and the confidence to know that you could look back on things. Actually, as you do things, I'm a great believer in doing things. That doing things helps all the time, because you say, well, I did that, and now I've done that, and nothing can take that away. So the next time you face into something, whenever you wake at night and things look tough, well, you faced a situation somewhat like this before, and yeah, you got through that. And so it's kind of, and there's no harm in letting the emotional side of things. In terms of leadership and staff, I've never found it a drawback to be, to let people know you understand their emotions, and that you can be emotional too, not in a self-pitying sense, not in a Trump sense. That makes me sick, that stuff. It's everybody's fault but his own, that's terrible stuff. Like if I tried that in any company, I would say, sure, they'd laugh you out of it, you wouldn't have a job, 5 weeks later. So it is a necessary attribute, but it probably comes from doing things. And another thing, Tony Blair said, if you decide, you divide. And doing things, as soon as you do something, you're going to find a whole bunch of people who don't agree with what you've done. You can talk about things indefinitely till the cows come home, but then when you do something, that's what really matters. And you can't take everybody with you all the time. So you have to get used to this idea of conflict and how to manage conflict. That's actually quite important, in how to manage conflict. And I'd say that's one big attribute of being a manager. And it's how you manage that stuff that the people still believe in you, even though they mightn't have liked exactly what you did, but they saw you had the courage to do it, and that's something that is, feel the fear and do it anyway, and have the courage to go for things. I remember the stuff that I was brought up on about courage. My father did the first farm survey in Ireland, and he found there was, I think, 5 million cattle. And James Dillon, who was the Minister of Agriculture, I think a month beforehand, had said, this government has, I don't know if you ever remember James Dillon, a wonderful way of speaking, 7 million cattle in Ireland. And my father went in and presented the report to the boss, and the boss said, but you can't say that, Bob, because James university in America learned how to count. And this is a fact. Oh, you'll have to go up to Whittaker and tell him. So my father went up to Whittaker and Ken and told him. And Ken, of course, then handled Dylan, and there was no problem. But that was the stuff that I was brought up on. You know, and that's luck.
We have a question here from James, I think, yeah. Get a microphone in, please.
Thank you very much. James Reardon, Brewers Brokers. Thank you for a lovely morning, Eddie. You mentioned risk and return are two sides of the same coin. You've just mentioned sleepless nights. You've mentioned fear. There's obviously responsibility in the roles you've been in. Can you think of one time, to make the question short, where you didn't sleep that night, and how did you cope with that?
Oh, and funny enough, in the electricity, there wasn't too many times. I mean, I might get annoyed that I wasn't getting my own way fully all the time, you know, but you'd think about that, I'm annoyed, okay, so I'm annoyed, so that doesn't matter. It's when you're facing extinction in the face, when, you know, in the world, you can't raise money anywhere because of the gigantic recession, and you see the way that Europe is behaving. I mean, Europe really Germany let an awful lot of companies in Europe down in the period 2010 to 2014 until Mario Draghi came along and started spending money like America had done to get us out of the recession. And Draghi is one of the great heroes of Europe, actually. So, you know, when you couldn't get money and then you got delayed in your payments and the cash situation, that would be the thing that you know, and you thought, it could be all over. You know, not due to anything that you've done, but just due to bad luck or just a government changes somewhere, or some slight change in the rules or something like that. So that's what would, you know, if you see that the thing that you've invested a lot of your energies in, if that's not going to work, well then that would be what would cause you difficulty. I'm very task orientated, and you know this thing, you're supposed to have people and task, you know, orientated, but you know, if the thing that you set your life to do doesn't look like it can work, then that's pretty devastating. But you know, then you go to sleep.
Okay, we have a question here, please, if you wouldn't mind getting the microphone. That'd be great. Again, name and organisation would be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Eddie, as the last speaker said, for a lovely morning. Mark Teevan from Toyota. Being in the auto industry, I'm interested to hear you mention decarbonisation of autos a couple of times. Two questions on that. One, how long do you think it will take to electrify to 2 million cars on Irish roads? And secondly, the implications of that for the electricity supply for the grid.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks very much for asking it. There's the National Grid in England there's 25 million cars in England, and National Grid has said there'll be 9 million electric cars by 2030, and the government in England has said there'll be 100% electric cars by 2040. So I think that's a reasonable time scale for England. And the Irish government has said, by the way, that it'll be 100% electric cars by 2030. And it's very hard to argue against that. I mean, no pollution, a lot more demand for electricity, incredible speed. I've driven what do you call it, Tesla, yeah, and I'm going to buy one now. I'm doing a test drive next week. 0 to 60 in the old-fashioned 0 to 100 kilometres an hour in 2.7 seconds, and quite comfortable. And more importantly, my golf clubs fit in the boot. I went over there to the Tesla garage after the driving Audi at the moment, and I said, one key test here. You know, I don't care about all that lovely environmental stuff, but I got to fit my golf club. And I saw there at the motor show in Paris or somewhere last week that there was these beautiful cars coming out. But I have to compliment Toyota on the Prius. We've had a Prius since 2007. Brilliant car altogether, still going strong, make great cars. I really believe that, and actually stand out among Japanese companies as innovators and people who not only survive but actually write in the agenda. I hope you have an electric car around the corner, because a lot of others have now, Mercedes, and I know that all of them, Porsche, but Tesla seem to be way ahead.
Okay, we might manage one more question over here, please.
Michael Feary from Cyan Construction. Eddie, just wondering, the European supergrid, where is that now? Is there any chance of it? It sounds not just for Ireland but for Europe in general as the key to unlock the electrification of Europe.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, we set up this institution and we got all the grid companies in Europe to join it in 2009, but we're getting nowhere. I mean, Europe, the countries in Europe still think very much isolationist. You know, the French sit there saying no, you know, like General de Gaulle did when Britain first applied to join the EU. How right he was. Anyway, and they sit there, you know, and say we're happy enough, we're a monopoly here, hunky-dory happy, but they're not going to be able to get to that penetration. I pulled out of that thing, and still going strong, and I get emails from them and stuff like that, but it'll probably be, if they don't get it organised within 10 years, and Brexit is not going to help, you know, really, if you think about it, if Germany and Britain were to link up together, and you know the way you have to hold thousands of megawatts in those big countries to cater for sudden variations in customer demand and for sudden loss of plant breaks down all of a sudden, and so you have to carry a big reserve. If you linked up Germany and Britain profoundly, one set of reserve plant would do you instead of two, and the cost onto the customer would actually pay for the supergrid. But you know you need leaders who have a sense of vision about them, and Mr. Cameron had no sense of vision whatsoever. He read the Mirror and whatever, and made his policy up on the basis of what they were saying about it. But so I unfortunately, you know, now I see them in America. They're starting to talk about profoundly augmenting the grid so they can have penetration. I mean, America installed 161,000 megawatts of renewable energy plant last year. That's an electricity system, you know, roughly 2.5 times the size of the UK, 15 times the size of Ireland in renewable energy plant last year. And they're finding the same thing, the variability of wind. You just have to link up bigger grids. But storage is coming along, and the car, when you think about the car, another aspect of all these electric cars is that you've got mobile storage of electricity. And if the 2 million cars in Ireland and the 75 kilowatt hours in each battery set, and they get, let's say, charged up at night, and then they plug when you drive into work, you plug that in. That's actually a reserve for the grid, and that's going to change things. So this industry of ours, this electricity industry, is actually going to change dramatically over the next while. A lot of the big companies like E.ON and RWE and EDF, they're finding it very hard to survive now. And my estimation is that the world of electricity will look so completely different. Every roof by 2030, I think, will be made out of tiles which are photoactive, and so every house will be a power station. So and I saw these tiles in Germany about 3 years ago. So it's not something in the future. This exists today, and so this, and what's the utility going to be doing? This risk-averse utility, like the ESB, pension funds invest, they won't let them do any innovation, but now it's all innovation. So that storage will play a gigantic role, and storage is getting cheaper. Elon Musk has said that storage, which is now at 400,000 per megawatt hour, will be 100,000 by 2020. Now, that's a reduction in price, 75% in a matter of 4 years from when he said it, and that, you know, will compensate to a certain extent. And then there's demand side management. Smart meters, I see there was an announcement here in Ireland that every meter is going to be changed over to be a smart meter. So that will allow you, you know, when the price of electricity goes up, well, then you'll switch off that particular heater or that freezer, or, you know, so in fact you'll be able to adjust the demand to the available supply. So there's a lot of change coming. and we're very happy, personally speaking, and company-wise, we're very happy with those changes, because if you do have an innovative company that just lives for innovation, well then the playing field is just an incredible place.
Okay, thank you so much. Just one or two housekeeping things very quickly. If you have a parking ticket, please make sure you get it validated on the ground floor before you leave. If people want to hang around for a few minutes and informally ask questions from Eddie, I'm sure he's happy to do that. There's plenty of tea, coffee, and breakfast left. That was absolutely fine. Just aware of people's diaries, so I'd like to thank the Aviva and the AV staff and so on. I'd particularly like to thank Ger, Grania, Carol and St. Aileen for all the work they've done in setting this up and coordinating everything. They've done a fantastic job. Thank you. And finally, of course, I'd like a big Buddha bus for Eddie. I thought he was fantastic, and all the folks in the